June 26, 2011. A television studio in London. The producers of Top Gear, the most watched motoring program on Earth with 350 million viewers across the world, are about to broadcast something they have never broadcast before. Richard Hammond is standing in the South African bush outside Johannesburg beside a vehicle that makes everything else in the car park look like a toy. It is enormous. It is 10 tons of welded steel with a double-skinned monocoque hull and a deep V-shaped underside. It is painted red. It looks like a truck that lost an argument with a tank and decided it preferred the outcome. Hammond has been given a simple brief. Throw everything you have at it. Drive it through walls. Park it where you are not allowed. Let lions attack it. Then put 7 pounds of plastic explosive underneath it and see what happens. The Marauder survived every single test. When the explosive detonated, the vehicle was blasted into a crater. When the dust cleared, it drove out. The rear tire had been blown off the rim. The trim was scratched. Every other component was intact. Beside it, for comparison, a Hummer had been subjected to the same charge. The Hummer was in pieces. Top Gear called the Marauder the world's most unstoppable vehicle. More than 350 million people watched it survive. And almost none of them had heard of the company that built it, or understood what that company represented. Its name was Paramount Group. And the Marauder was what happened when the most militarized nation on Earth suddenly had to build everything for itself. To understand why the Marauder existed, you need to understand what happened to South Africa in 1994. Apartheid ended. The most militarized nation on the African continent, a country that had spent 3 decades building one of the most sophisticated domestic defense industries in the world, under mandatory international arms embargoes, suddenly found itself with a government that wanted nothing to do with weapons. Defense spending was slashed. The army demobilized. Factories that had been building armored vehicles for the border war, the Casspir, the Ratel, the Buffel, the Hippo, were decommissioned, sold, or left to rust. Huge quantities of surplus military equipment sat in depots with no buyers and no purpose. Into this landscape walked a 27-year-old drama student from Johannesburg named Ivor Ichikowitz. He had studied at the University of the Witwatersrand, had been a member of the African National Congress, and had no military background whatsoever. What he had was an eye for surplus. The post-apartheid government was selling off equipment it no longer wanted at prices that reflected its urgency to be rid of it. Ichikowitz began buying. He founded Paramount Group in 1994, initially to export surplus South African military equipment to the peacekeeping missions and internal security forces that were proliferating across Africa as the Cold War ended and old conflicts reignited. He was not, he always insisted, an arms dealer. He was an industrialist. The distinction mattered to him. It would take years before it mattered to anyone else. The Marauder emerged from this context in the mid-2000s. Paramount had grown from a surplus trader into a manufacturer. It had absorbed the institutional knowledge of engineers, designers, and production specialists who had nowhere else to go after the post-apartheid defense industry contraction. These were people who had spent careers solving the specific problems of African warfare, landmines, ambushes, extreme heat and dust, vast distances, the absence of spare parts, the impossibility of air evacuation. The vehicle they designed drew on every lesson from 3 decades of border war engineering. The hull was a double-skinned monocoque, 2 layers of steel with space between them to absorb blast and ballistic energy. The underside was shaped into a deep V, the same geometry Vernon Joynt had proven in November 1973 when he detonated 21 kilograms of TNT under the Hyena prototype and watched 2 men walk out. The ground clearance was extreme, over 400 millimeters beneath the axles. The driver sat above the axle line, as far from the blast as the hull geometry allowed. Anti-blast seats absorbed the shock energy that the hull itself could not. Every flammable component was mounted outside the protected capsule. The crew compartment was sealed, air-conditioned, filtered. It could carry 2 crew plus 8 fully equipped soldiers. It could be configured as an ambulance, a command vehicle, a mortar carrier, a fire support platform. It was built to survive 14 kilograms of TNT under any wheel and 7 kilograms directly beneath the hull, and it could do 120 kilometers per hour on road. Paramount launched the Marauder at the 2007 International Defense Exhibition and Conference in Abu Dhabi, the largest arms exhibition in the Middle East. The timing was deliberate. Iraq was consuming American forces in a war defined by the improvised explosive device. Every Western army was desperately seeking mine-protected vehicles. The American MRAP program was about to absorb $45 billion. Paramount was offering something different. Not a vehicle designed by a committee in a NATO country for a European war, but a vehicle designed by people who had been fighting in African terrain for 30 years and had learned exactly what a buried mine would do to a flat-bottomed truck. Jordan signed the first contract in 2008. The King Abdullah II Design and Development Bureau became both a customer and a manufacturing partner. 50 Marauders entered Jordanian service, locally produced under license. Azerbaijan followed. By 2014, 85 Marauders and their companion vehicles had entered Azerbaijani service, with local production established through Kazakhstan Paramount Engineering, a joint venture that would eventually produce the Azerbaijani variant of the vehicle under the name Tufan, meaning storm. Kazakhstan took the same technology under the name Arlan, meaning wolf. Singapore signed a deal worth nearly €90 million in 2011 for 101 highly sophisticated variants designated the Belrex, built to specifications that went beyond the base Marauder in electronic integration and mission systems. Mali, Nigeria, Algeria, Malawi, Gabon, Mozambique, the Republic of Congo, the vehicle spread across the continent it had been designed for. The Top Gear episode, broadcast on June 26, 2011, reached an audience that no defense exhibition had ever reached. Hammond drove the vehicle through the streets of Johannesburg and brought the city's busiest traffic to a standstill. He parked it illegally outside a coffee shop. When a tow truck arrived, Hammond simply drove away, pulling the tow truck behind him on the hook. The torque of the Marauder's diesel engine, 300 horsepower through an automatic transmission, was sufficient to haul a tow truck as deadweight without measurable strain. He drove into a McDonald's drive-thru. The windscreen wipers demolished the menu board. The vehicle was undamaged. He parked outside a supermarket and came out to find 2 cars blocking him in. He climbed over them. He drove through a brick wall in Johannesburg without reducing speed. Then came the lions. Paramount's engineers had released several lions from a nearby reserve into the bush around a stationary Marauder. The lions investigated the vehicle at close range. The Marauder was not damaged. The lions were not harmed. The test was inconclusive in military terms and conclusive in every other respect. Then came the explosive. 7 pounds of plastic explosive, the equivalent of a substantial battlefield IED, detonated beneath the vehicle. The Marauder was thrown into the air and landed in a crater. It drove out. The comparison Hummer was destroyed. Ivor Ichikowitz watched the footage and said, "We challenged Richard Hammond to throw anything he wanted at it, and Marauder withstood it all." The combat test came not in Africa, but in the Caucasus. Azerbaijan had deployed its Marauder fleet extensively by the time the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War began on September 27th. The conflict lasted 44 days and ended in Azerbaijani victory. It was also the first large-scale modern war fought under sustained drone surveillance and attack. Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones and Israeli Harop loitering munitions destroyed Armenian armor at ranges and in volumes that rewrote conventional military thinking about the survivability of unprotected ground vehicles. In this environment, the Marauder's double-skin hull and mine-protected underside were tested against real anti-tank mines, artillery shrapnel, and the general violence of a high-intensity conflict. Azari Defense Magazine documented several specific incidents. In one, filmed and released by the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense, 2 large anti-tank mines detonated simultaneously under a Marauder's wheel. The vehicle was thrown sideways by the blast. The personnel inside escaped unharmed. The magazine's assessment was direct. The vehicles provided high levels of protection against landmines, enemy fire, shrapnel from exploding artillery, and mortar shells. At least 4 Marauders were damaged or abandoned during the conflict. No crew fatalities from inside the hull were publicly reported. In Mali, Marauders deployed with the Malian armed forces against Islamist insurgencies in the Sahel operated across terrain defined by extreme dust, poor roads, and the constant threat of IEDs along supply routes. The vehicle's mobility and mine protection made it a primary platform for securing those routes. The Marauder's limitations were honest and well understood. It was not a combat vehicle in the conventional sense. Its armament was whatever could be fitted to the roof ring: machine guns, remote weapon stations, light cannon. It could not engage armor. It was not amphibious without preparation, though it could ford to a depth of 900 millimeters. Against a modern anti-tank missile or a high-caliber direct-fire weapon, its steel would not hold. In the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the same Azerbaijani forces operating Marauders also suffered catastrophic losses of conventional tanks and armored vehicles to Armenian anti-tank guided missiles. The Marauder survived because it was not used in roles where its limitations mattered. It carried troops, evacuated casualties, provided protected command positions, and absorbed the mine and IED threats that the larger vehicles could not withstand. That was what it was designed for. That was what it did. Paramount Group itself became a more complicated story after the Top Gear moment. The Singapore deal, the most ambitious in the company's history, encountered severe difficulties. Paramount Combat Systems, the subsidiary responsible for production, entered liquidation. Internal disputes between Paramount and engineering partners over the Mwari reconnaissance aircraft became public and bitter. In August 2024, Paramount Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States to address an arbitration penalty from a dispute with an unnamed Middle Eastern company. The company stated its global operations were unaffected. The vehicle had outlasted the corporate drama surrounding it. Variants of the Marauder were being built in 3 countries under 3 different names by the time Paramount's American legal difficulties began. The Marauder Mark II had been unveiled in August 2022 with updated ergonomics and production efficiencies. The vehicle that had survived 7 pounds of plastic explosive in the South African bush in 2011 was still being manufactured, still being exported, still protecting the crews that rode in it. June 26, 2011. A television studio in London. 350 million viewers watch Richard Hammond drive a red armored car out of a crater. The vehicle has just had 7 pounds of plastic explosive detonated beneath it. It has a flat tire, everything else is intact. Beside the crater, the Hummer that received the same charge is in pieces. The company that built the Marauder was founded in 1994 by a drama student with no military background, buying surplus equipment from a government that wanted rid of it. The vehicle it eventually built drew on 30 years of South African border war engineering. The same V-hull Vernon Joynt had proven in 1973, the same mine-protected geometry that had saved South African policemen in Ovamboland, the same institutional knowledge that the post-apartheid defense contraction had scattered but not destroyed. It survived 2 anti-tank mines in Azerbaijan. It survived the Sahel. It survived Top Gear. 350 million people watched it survive, and the lesson was the same one that had been written in the red dust of Ovamboland 40 years earlier. You can build a vehicle that survives what kills everything else. South Africa had been doing it for decades. The world had simply not been paying attention.